Come order.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And this Queen's speech today confirms what we already know, that this government lacks the vision and the ability to tackle the main challenges of the day. Last week we saw voters in Wales deliver their message to this Prime Minister loud and clear in the local elections, and it was a very good Friday indeed for the Labour Party in Wales. I'd like to congratulate all the successful candidates, the Welsh Labour candidates in Newport East, in Newport and in Monmouthshire, on the mandates they secured, particularly to those colleagues in Monmouthshire whose work has resulted in the party opposite losing their only council in Wales. What ambitious Labour-led councils like Newport have shown, and will continue to show, that there is a kinder, a more positive and a more proactive alternative to the Tory way of doing things. And given this message that was sent last week, on behalf of constituents in Newport East, I am deeply frustrated that this Queen's speech has failed to deliver anything meaningful to help people cope with the cost of living crisis now. In fairness, expectations were low. You only had to watch the Prime Minister's disastrous interview with Susanna Reid last week to see that those in power have such little understanding of the sacrifices people are having to make. And in the last few days in the news, we have been bombarded with news of how household energy bills will potentially hit £3,000 a year by October, how our fire services across the country are reporting they're dealing with blazes caused by people burning scraps of wood to keep warm, and as was widely reported, how more than 2 million people aren't eating every day because they just can't afford it. How, as the fifth largest economy in the world, are we in a position where our people are resorting to skipping meals and burning offcuts of wood to keep their heads above water? And with food prices continuing to increase, this situation will only get worse, not better. Which is why today, the Queen's speech, we should have seen more action to tackle this and to support households. This government continues to hit people on modest incomes disproportionately, but there was no hope today for these families, just an energy bill that will eventually make energy cheaper and a nod to working to ease inflation. Like other honourable members, I see messages and emails daily from people who have nowhere to turn, who just don't want to live a life where they aren't worrying about whether they can, heat or eat. And there was little here today to help them now or even in the short term. No emergency budget, no extra help. And given that the things today are essentially the government's programme for the next 2 years, I worry about all those families who are already out of options. And the government and if the government have run out of ideas of their own, it's still not too late for them to adopt our proposal to keep energy bills lower through a one-off windfall tax on oil and gas profits, a move that was referred to by the CEO of Tesco's in Radio 4 today, a move that would save every household hundreds of pounds a year on their fuel bills and provide much-needed additional support to the lowest income households. This is right and fair. This is the right and fair thing to do. That the government continues to side with major firms like Centrica, who today announced they expect their profits to hit the top of their expected range, and oil and gas companies who describe their situation as having more money than they know what to do with, rather than those of ordinary families, speaks volumes. And while the UK government clearly doesn't get the scale of the problem, I'm pleased that the Welsh Labour government does, and it's worth sharing a contrast with the Welsh Labour government. The extra support in Wales includes £150 cost of living payment to all households in properties in council tax bands A to D, and to all those in receipt of any council tax benefit, which goes further than the UK government's equivalent announcement for England, and that there'll be an extension to the Welsh Winter Fuel Support Scheme, which will again provide people on low incomes and others a non-repayable being the key word here, £200 cash payment to help with their energy bills later this year, which they'll receive on top of the £200 loan from the government. Unlike the government, I also want to talk about steel, another important issue for Newport East and indeed the whole of the UK, if the government's actually serious about levelling up. There was no reference to steel or the industrial strategy in any of the Queen's speeches since 2019, and this one was no exception. As a community union member, and I declare an interest here as a community union member, community union have highlighted the world cannot decarbonise without steel, whether it's to build wind turbines, electric vehicles, energy-efficient buildings or anything else. It's a foundation industry that we need for our defence and national security, particularly important at the moment. Sadly, we have a government that's only willing to do the bare minimum at moments of crisis for the industry and is otherwise more than prepared to leave the sector hanging without support. And steel workers in my constituency in Tatterland, Wern and in Liberty feel this acutely and want a government that will give them the vote of confidence they deserve. A pressing priority is on steel safeguards and tariff rate quotas, something I hoped would have been addressed in the Brexit measures that are in here today. Ministers should also move forward on previous commitments to a thorough review of the trade remedies system to ensure that we have a trade defence system fit for the 21st century. UK Steel and the Steel APPG have been calling for this for some time, and swift action is needed. We also need action on high industrial energy prices. Other countries in Europe can step in and help their steel industry. Why can't we? And while on the surface, promise of more policing powers to make our streets safer sounds welcome, there's no detail on how these additional powers will be resourced. The new recruits we've seen over the last year are of course welcome, but the government really need to stop claiming that they're employing extra police officers. These are not extra officers, but partial replacements for those they've cut since 2010. Today we have 11,000 less police officers, 7,000 less PCSOs and 8,000 less police staff in work than we did when Labour left office in 2010. We need new police hubs in every community and more protection for victims of antisocial behaviour. I can't help but wonder whether the failure to mention Wales today is simply because the government know how badly their announcement on the Shared Prosperity Fund were received last month. With Wales facing a loss of more than £1 billion in unreplaced funding over the next 3 years, it does beg the question as to whether the Prime Minister seriously thinks the people of Wales have forgotten his government's not a penny less promise to at least match the size of EU structural funds that Wales would have received post-Brexit. And on to rail. I welcome work to modernise and improve rail services, but what plans are there within this Queen's speech today for the government to address the appalling rail infrastructure underfunding in Wales? Wales accounts for 11% of the UK rail network, but still only receives 2% of rail enhancement funding from the UK government. Wales' rail networks are underfunded by billions of pounds, and this needs addressing today. So I'd urge the government to take a strategic look at what it can do to improve cross-border transport between South East Wales and the South West of England. A new station for Mega would help, and I pay tribute to the volunteers at Major Action Group on Rail who continue to campaign so hard for this. Action in the group's plan would be a positive step in the right direction. To finish on a slightly more positive note, there were rays of hopes in the government's response to the Crouch review on football governance recently, which was referenced in the Queen's speech today. But I hope we'll soon see the DCMS Secretary make good on the pledge to introduce an independent football regulator. A timetable on this would be good, as would an assurance that ministers will not cede to the demands of vested interests and delay or water down their plans on regulation. As Fair Game have highlighted, we also need to see an overhaul of the outdated parachute payment system and its replacement with a sustainability index that rewards conscientiously run clubs like Newport County AFC in my constituency, which prioritise good governance and strong relationships within the community. And I hope the government will engage with Fair Game and other stakeholders over the coming months to ensure that momentum on these important changes are not lost, and look at the Newport County model. In short, what we've seen today is a Queen's speech that was written to shore up a listing PM, not a Queen's speech for families and workers who are really looking for support right now. Deeply disappointing, yes. Surprising, no.